And I really want to talk about how we make the pivot from transactions to relationships. If I ask anybody who does not feel busy here, anybody want to raise your hand? Even if you're not, which I don't think is the case, but even if you weren't, nobody would want to raise their hand, I'm not busy. So think about this. We have kind of a perfect storm. We're super duper overly committed, busy people, working for causes that are in an ecosystem of lots and lots and lots of causes, with the pressure to raise money year after year. Ouch. That's a tough place to work. And y'all are working so hard, and we know you're touching millions of people, and we know you're raising millions of dollars, but there's a problem, and it's a problem we don't talk about enough. Writ large in the nonprofit sector, we know that there's a cancer of retention rates. I have, for many, many years, sat on many, many boards of directors of nonprofits. I'm chair of the board of a national organization right now. I can't think of a single time, even when I've been chair, that we've had a conversation about retention rates. It just doesn't happen. But here's the reality. 100 donors in year 1 turns into 40 donors year 2, turns into 10 donors year 3. It costs 7 times the amount of money to acquire a new donor than to retain the old one. And yet, we don't do it. It's really, really hard. But part of what's happened is we have fallen into a trap that I call the transactional churn, which is we have come up with a set of activities, a set of metrics to measure those activities that have us running after new donors year after year, and it's exhausting. So I want to talk to you, first I want to talk a little bit about networks, and then I want to talk to you about how to get out of the churn. So because we are in peer-to-peer fundraising here, you are by definition working within networks. So networks are, anybody have Tinker Toys as a kid? Do you remember Tinker Toys? Right? The sticks and the round parts in network speak are nodes, people or organizations. And the sticks are the relationships that connect us to one another. In social networks, the sticks are empty, like straws. And the gasoline, the fuel that's running between them, that's activating those networks, is social capital. That's the stuff that creates knowingness, meaningfulness between one another, trust and reciprocity. You can have a little bit of social capital, and that's an acquaintance. Or you can have a lot, and that's your closest friends and family. In order to activate our networks for change, we've got to fill them up with social capital. And that doesn't come through transactions. That comes from deep relationship building between people and between organizations and people. And that's your charge. And it's not easy. It's not easy because you're swimming upstream against a lot of conventional wisdom. If you're going to take the time and energy it's going to take to focus on relationship building. So let me start by outlining the 3 questions you can begin with to start the pivot from transactions to relationships. Here's the first question. It is, how do we make you feel? Not, how do you feel about us? How do we make you feel when you're engaged with us? Do you feel known as a person? Do you feel heard? Do you feel powerful? Do you feel like you matter? Or do you feel like an ATM machine? Do you feel like a data point in a large database of emails that are being churned out? I can't tell you what the results of asking this question will be because I have yet to find an organization that's asked it. So if you do, please let me know. But I do know from talking to thousands and thousands of donors and activists over the years that they are waiting for someone to ask them that question. The second question is, what is your story? Right? We know we have the digital platforms to scale storytelling. We need to ask people to tell their stories, and we have to listen to them. Right? It's one thing to just ask people to tell their stories and throw it out into the ether. It's another to listen deeply to what they say. Why are you here? What motivates you to work for this cause? What pain has happened in your life, or what joy do you want to bring? What does this mean to you? What do you want to share with other people? Everybody has a story. Your job is to ask for it and listen to it. It's going to come in handy, and we're going to get there in a second. And the third question is a question organizations very, very rarely ask: what problem can we solve together? The old legacy organizations, the ones that Beth Cantor and I and Network Nonprofit called fortresses, in those iterations behind the fortress walls, staff are supposed to have all of the answers. Well, if we had all the answers, we wouldn't be doing the hardest work there is to do, which is social change work. There is no harder work than what you all are engaged in. We cannot possibly have all of the answers. And yet, day after day, nonprofit staffs feel like it's their job to go out into the world and pretend to have the answers or the strategy, all tied up with a bow. People out there are smart, and they're kind, and they're generous. We need to tap into all of that good stuff and ask for their real help. What are the sticking points in what you're trying to do? Is it that people sign up to participate in your events but don't actually do any fundraising? That could be an interesting problem to try to wrestle with your group, with your network. Is it that the mechanisms for signing up are difficult? I don't know. I would begin, though, with a conversation with your people of what is a problem that we could solve together. If you want to tie somebody in to becoming a long-term, loyal activist with you, make them into problem solvers. Now they're with you forever. They're invested in this. They've helped to create something. If you can ask those questions, what you're doing is you are moving from a network to an actual community. We use the word community way too much, but what it is, in essence, in practice, are groups of people who have names, actual names, real names that they use, that they want you to call them. They have buddies. They have peers that they can talk to and ask questions of and be guided by and rely on for help. They have stories, personal stories, deep stories, stories that move them and will move other people to actions. And they have rituals, regular activities that are expected that bind people together. We have communities like these in religions. Another place we have communities like these, which would be a great model to look at, is a support group like Alcoholics Anonymous. Think about it. Everybody who shows up, they say their name, and they tell their story, and they have a sponsor. And the sponsors do this work not because it's nice, they do it because somebody did it for them. And above all, they have their rituals, right? They have the known, expected, regular activities that bind them to one another, and they cry and they celebrate together. You can create communities like that at scale with the digital platforms that we have. Now, when you go back to your organizations, the chances are that you're going to run into what I call the default wall. The default wall, right? That's the way we always do things. We are risk averse. Who's in a nonprofit? Almost by definition, you're risk averse. You're closed more than open. You're transactional more than relational. That's a tough river to swim upstream in. I totally get that, and you have my complete empathy. However, it's not an excuse for trying to carve out an experiment someplace in the next year where you can focus on doing 3 things after you ask those questions. You got to start with those questions. And then you can do 3 things. Your experiment can start by always being conversational. Again, back to the old model where we were supposed to have all the answers, and that worked in a broadcast way of working. Organization speaks, people out there are supposed to listen and do. We all know nobody out there is waiting to listen and do. They have lots and lots of options of how to spend their time, and they're also very busy. So the way to engage is through conversations, through actual questions that you don't know the answer to. Not window dressing, real questions, right? What should be our activity this year? What can we DIY in our strategy that people out there can own with us? What don't we know the answers to? I can guarantee that a lot of your work is based on assumptions you're making about what people like, what they don't like. Just last week, I was talking to the board of a large national organization, and I said, how's your relationship with your donors? They said, great. I said, how do you know? And they said, we don't hear anything from them. It's fantastic. It's all quiet. And I had to say, quiet is not good. Quiet, in my mind, means people were trying to tell you things and they got tired of trying to make you listen. That's when it gets quiet, when people are tired, not that they don't have a lot to say. You're making assumptions that you can turn into questions. Do you actually like this part of what we're doing? Do you like this one, or do you like this one over here? Which one do you want to do? How would you design it if you were in our shoes? We can design together. So, anywhere you can have conversations with people online, on land, do it. It doesn't have to be scientific. It doesn't have to be a survey. They're not data points, they're people. Ask good questions and trust what your people have to say. The second one is to figure out where and how you can incorporate rituals and celebrations into your work. Colleen mentioned the lack of thank you notes and thank yous in general to people. Wherever you're thanking somebody now, triple it, quadruple it. They haven't heard you. You have to thank and thank and thank and celebrate and have some ways of interacting that people are anticipating and expecting and like and enjoy. It doesn't have to be a huge celebration. It doesn't have to break the bank. It has to be real and heartfelt. And the final thing is to find ways to co-create, to create things together with your people, to lead in equal amounts to following people. Again, I understand that is going against the grain of a lot of the organizational defaults you may have, Again, why you're going to need to carve out an experiment. But any way that you can bring into your effort the ideas and suggestions of real people out there, it will come back and help you exponentially. The one thing I do know is that over the last 50 years, we have seen an implosion of trust in large institutions in our country. We're seeing this all over the world, actually. That lack of trust has led to a lack of trust, so many fewer communities where people can feel that they actually belong. So although you are working in a sea of causes right now, there is a dearth of communities, real communities, strong, respectful, caring communities for people to engage in. And that's your greatest opportunity right now. I know you can do this. I know you have the ability, the empathy, the caring, the creativity to do this. And if we begin to focus on newer measures, we do need our transactional measures, but when we begin to put relational measures in there, because, of course, we measure what we value. If we value relationships, we're going to begin to measure them in new and different ways. You're going to begin to see progress along those pathways as well. I want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes. Cesar Chavez said, "It was never about grapes and lettuce, and it was always about the people." Thank you very much.